to another one of our Accreditation TV episodes. Today, have the honor of having a couple of great guests, and we're going to talk about emergency management. Before I get to that, though, I want to first of all welcome everybody and mention that please, if you have questions, there's two ways that you can kind of reach out to us. The way that you can actually get to us during this event is through clicking on the Q&A tab and actually asking a question there. And we'll do our very best to get back to you during the conversation. If not, we'll get back to you via email after this is over with. And obviously, if you're watching this after the live event and you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to see you over in our MSL Ready Now community. If you're not already a member, there's a basic free membership. Please join there. And if you want to have greater access to us and information and CECs and things like that, let us know. We'd love to talk to you about that. So with that, I want to introduce our two distinguished guests today. The first one is my partner here at MSL. We've been together for 18 years now, almost. Sue McLaughlin, who knows a lot about a lot of stuff, but emergency management is certainly one of her sweet spots.
Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And then we've got also Dr. Edwin Lofton, who's our clinical expert and leads what was the ARM, but is now our MSL Ready Now community. He's kind of in charge of that, puts together all this education. We're really fortunate to have him as part of the team. So what we want to do, we want to talk a little bit about emergency management, which ironically is one, if we think about the A360, and I don't want to get too deep into Joint Commission because this topic covers all of the AOs and certainly CMS, and frankly, it's a very broad topic that ought to be addressed at any organization, regardless of where they are. And we can get into all those details here in a minute. But my point is, it's from A360 standpoint, where as a general rule, they went less prescriptive with standards, particularly in the physical environment. And the emergency management side, they're much more prescriptive than any other chapter. Is that a fair statement, Sue?
Yes, I think it is very fair.
So let's talk a little bit about how this, in terms of from a survey perspective, when the surveyors show up, whether they're Joint Commissioner, whoever, DMV, CMS, who ought to be involved or who will likely, not ought to be, but who will likely be involved in demonstrating compliance and readiness from an emergency management perspective? I think it's a better way to put it.
Yeah, good question, Steve. I think there's a couple of aspects to this, and some of these have been seen before in previous surveys. Others, not so much, because they're a little bit more specific, as you said, in what they're going to be looking at now for emergency management, specifically with the changes that Joint Commission has made. But the bottom line is anybody throughout the organization can be asked about their role in emergency management. So basically, everybody needs to know what they need to know for their role, and that's the way the organization should be presenting the content that they're training their staff on, is what is your role and what does that entail? What do you know? To whom do you report? How were you trained? This sort of thing. So there will be some staff members that'll be serving on the emergency management committee. And those folks obviously have a little bit of a different role. They need to know basically more about the doings of the committee and what's been planned, how is training conducted, what are our planned drills, what were our previous exercises, that sort of thing, and be able to be conversant about all of those things. Frontline staff, they're going to need to know what their responsibilities are. They're going to need to explain how they're notified of an emergency. Do they continue to do their regular job? Do they report to a labor pool? whatever the case may be. And so the familiarity with their roles in emergency management is important. And so, with that in mind, and we'll get more into this later in the conversation, but with that in mind, the people just need to be, in general, knowing what their roles are in the program. To whom do they report? How do they respond?
Gotcha. So Ed, when you lived this a couple of times, right, with and when your previous life as a CNO and COO, I know the pandemic was one that was kind of an extended, but um, yeah, I'm sure we've all experienced this as we go out in the hospitals. We ask this question, we'll say, "Well, who's?" Let's talk about emergency management, and they go, "Oh, that's so and so's job." It's like,
No,
well,
it's everybody's job. And excellent question. And to your point, Sue, as well, emergency management is one of the ultimate focuses of team sport. This cannot be done by one alone, by one department, one person, or one specialty. This is where life safety, environment of care, plant facilities, and clinical services have got to be on the same page. And Steve, as you said, I have lived emergency management quite a bit, having worked both in the coast of North Carolina and the coast of Florida. I've been through, I think, 29 hurricanes on site and facilities. I've also experienced, I was incident commander in the pandemic, and also unfortunately, a on site fatality shooting. So back to Sue's components, how you prepare, how you plan, and how you evaluate your readiness is extremely important. And the documentation demonstrating that it is critical. One of the conversations that my CEO and I had on a regular basis was, as a freestanding hospital in emergency management perspective, we have to be ready to live for 3 to 7 days in a standalone, no external support. Therefore, are your generators working? Are your supplies appropriate? And the supplies go across the board. But again, team sport is the key to emergency management.
yeah. So you mentioned living on the coast, and so I don't know, when people are watching this, as we're broadcasting it, what hurricane season started about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So we're starting to ramp up for that on the coast too. So I feel that pain. But the point of that, Sue, in Chicago, hurricanes aren't really on the radar up there. They have other issues are on the radar. And so understanding what those vulnerabilities are with the highest risk are, I think are important. And that's why we have this, whether you're Joint Commission or whoever, the hazard vulnerability analysis or whatever you call it, risk assessment should be something that not only the leaders of emergency management are involved in, but certainly the leaders of the organization. And, Edwin's had the unique perspective where he's had to look at hurricanes and potential rocket explosions or crashes, which I'm will say with a hint of envy in my voice, being right there in Titusville. But each situation is unique, and the expectation, I think, and Sue, I'd love your opinion on this going forward, is that leadership is going to be able to articulate what are those high risk items and what the organization is doing to try to mitigate those risks.
Yeah, absolutely. Leadership is essential. And one of the things, I mean, the hazard vulnerability analysis, as you mentioned, has been around for a very long time, and that's the key to your planning in your individual organization. Emergency management is not one size fits all at every hospital. It's different depending on where you're located, what your risks are, and so on and so forth. But yeah, if I can speak from Joint Commission perspective for a moment, but this really can apply to everybody in the organization, is that Joint Commission in their A360 standards has published um, a list of questions basically in the annex to the survey process guide that are going to be reviewed during the survey. And it's really interesting to look at that from this point in time. It's not that things have changed so much, but they specifically say to whom they're going to address questions during the emergency management interview. And there are some places where they're talking to staff,
Mhm,
there are some
mhm,
places where they're talking to
mhm,
leadership
mhm.
on the committee, and not just whoever is in charge of emergency management in your organization. So there has to be a working knowledge of the plans, the processes, how things were developed by everybody on that emergency management committee. And that, I think, is changed in that they're given so much specific information as to who they're going to ask what questions. So, people are going to be asked questions such as, how is the committee defined and represented? Who's sitting on the committee? How does the committee plan and evaluate the emergency management program? Those are all questions that are directed to leadership. Describing their succession plans, otherwise known as the continuity of operations plan. This is not something that the emergency manager does and puts in a book. The leaders of the organization have to be responsible for that. They're also going to be asked about things like the roles that they would have in evaluating after action reports. Again, not something that's written by the emergency manager and, you know, everybody else nods and says that's fine. They're going to need to be able to talk about it, how that was conducted, or how the after action report was conducted. What does it mean? Do they agree with everything? Is everybody in agreement with what they decided were the actions that needed to be um, taken following this exercise or event? So it's a lot of very specific questions that's going to be asked to leadership. Now, other than leadership, you're going to have some staff members on that emergency management committee as well. And they're going to be asked, you know, about their education, their training. And in fact, any staff member in the hospital can be asked, how were you trained on emergency management? And that's outside of the interview. This is part of the building tour. When they're going around, they're talking to staff, the typical questions are, what would you do if you discovered a fire, and so on and so forth. But how were you trained in emergency management? When was the last time you had an update? This sort of thing. So that's really getting involved and involving every single member of the organization.
One thing
Yes.
I'd like
Go
one thing
ahead.
I'd like to add to what Sue was talking about, and she mentioned it, but there is a higher emphasis now with A360, and I know with CMS, and that is the PI component of your planning and evaluation. How do the leaders in the organization evaluate the organization's response to a situation, to emergency management drill or actual event, and how are the sciences of performance improvement evaluation put into place and retested to improve outcomes the next time? And that is a strong push on the leadership assessment for emergency management.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
And
go ahead, Sue.
I also would like to add there that they're going to be reviewing the credentials and job descriptions of the emergency manager and key leadership on the committee as well. So, um, they're doing a deep dive now into how well this is working.
Yeah, so what I was going to ask you guys, because I mean, this is all again about accreditation readiness, and that's it's accreditation TV is if you're in the role, you're responsible for preparing the organization for survey. We'll start there. I'm going to follow up after that with another question. But we'll start there. We're preparing for survey. What are the things? What would you bring to leadership in terms of preparation? Yeah.
I would bring back to leadership a review of the risk assessment, the hazardous vulnerability assessment, and why decisions were made for the type of training. Back to your point earlier, Steve, in Florida on the coast, it's going to be looking at hurricanes and tornadoes, and Sue in Chicago is going to be looking at snow and ice storms. But what was the rationale for the decisions, and allocation of resources, and why changes in the emergency management plan were made based on the PI. Those are key talking points for leadership from a strategic directive.
So yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking about it, sort of from the how do we do it? We do our reports and how we do them in action planner, right? With we say here's what we found, and here's what the recommendation is. It seems to me it'd be a good idea to say here's the HPA or whatever we're calling it. Here's the number one risk item. Here's a summary, a paragraph or sentence or two, or even less, of what we've done as an organization, if they're not already aware, to mitigate some of that risk. We take hurricanes, for example. What have we done to prepare for,
Mhm.
because let's face it, the hurricane lasts 24 to 48 hours. The event might last 2 weeks. I mean, I finally did my own HVA and got a home generator after the second one took us out for a week, a week without power. You can go 2 days, but like when it gets to 6 and 7, it starts to really stink. And so do you. So, I think being able to take that information to them succinctly so, they're prepared to respond. They should know it anyway, right? So then to expand upon that a little bit, going a little bit deeper, um, just in a general sense, how as leaders for emergency management, for quality, for patient safety, risk management, do you educate leadership in a ways that they're involved and want to be involved and can be involved in the emergency management side of this thing?
Well, I think there's a lot of aspects to that question, and the first thing I want to point out, and again, this is Joint Commission perspective, but it's not exclusive to Joint Commission, is when they wrote rewrote the standards following COVID, they really put a lot of emphasis on the leadership of the organization and what their responsibilities are with respect to emergency management. They talked about, being part of the team, basically a lot of different issues all the way down to approval of funding for emergency management. And so that put a whole different perspective on getting the leadership involved. And I think that's true for any accreditation organization, for any survey at any healthcare organization. They need the support of leadership to make this whole process happen and to allocate the resources and to know what the plans are and so on and so forth. And so that I think is just really critical. Um, that has not changed with the latest standards at all. It's still all there. So that's critical.
And another component to regularly review with the entire leadership team, and this is done through drills and actual events, is the incident command structure of emergency management.
Yes.
Incident command structure, leaders take on sometimes different than traditional roles. So having to practice those roles outside of your norm. As a nurse leader, I may actually be responsible for PRN staffing across the organization, not just my unit. Or as in my case, as the CNO, I was the incident commander, and I had to look at a broader picture. But making sure everybody understands their roles, and to the points made earlier, the succession planning and practicing the succession planning. One of the things that we did post COVID, and actually in preparations for hurricanes at my last organizations, was we had a planned hurricane drill in which all of the executive team were going to be locked away in a room as if we were unavailable to be there. And we had to depend on that secondary line of leadership to step up and automatically take those roles. That was a good lesson to learn.
Yeah.
A learning experience.
Yes.
I mean, that's the reality, right? I mean, the nice thing
Mhm.
about hurricanes is they're kind enough to let us know they're coming for a long period of time. So, chances are the person that is designated to be the incident commander can get back to the organization and be there and prepared to take on that role. But the majority of things that exist on our HVAs aren't as kind.
No.
I say that a little bit jokingly. I had a discussion with a friend of mine once. He was like, at least with hurricanes, you get, a lot of notice that they're
Mhm.
coming. And I'm like, that's a double-edged sword because it's like 4 days where you're like totally stressed out, crazy, worried before it ever gets there. But I almost rather have it just hit. But the rest of that stuff, you've got to be able to depend on people, whoever's there, and it may be midnight on Saturday, so it might be, I don't even know if they still call him the house supervisor, but whoever that person is that normally is maybe not sitting in the boardroom table during leadership meetings, but all of a sudden is in charge of the whole ship.
Well,
Mhm.
and Steve, to your point, July 17th coming up will be 10-year anniversary, regretfully, of when I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and received a phone call at 2:09 a.m. from my organization saying we had just had a patient and a employee murdered on site, and we had to do exactly what you just said at 2:09 on Sunday morning, have the house supervisor be incident commander, and then begin putting everything together for a very physically, emotionally disruptive emergency management plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you imagine? Go ahead, Sue.
The other thing I want to say, talking about the incident command structure, is I think most hospitals are using the hospital incident command system, which is, out there and published, and everybody has their job action sheets and whatever. The thing that you need to consider, I think, especially if you're in a smaller hospital, is you couldn't possibly fill all those positions on the chart if you wanted to. So consider something like making that Hicks organization chart your own. Combine positions, create your own job action sheets for the combined positions. I've seen that work both ways. For a very large organization, I've seen them blow up the Hicks organization chart. But for a smaller one, you're not possibly going to be able to use all those positions, and if you take it out of the box, it's a little difficult to use unless you put some time in to modify it to fit your organization. So that's just another thought.
No,
Yeah,
that's very important.
yeah, for sure. And so that should be part of the documentation that's available, right? So,
Oh, absolutely. You have to have your whole EOP ready to go. There's still going to be a large section of document review. There's a laundry list in, of what has to be looked at, and you have to know that EOP document in and out prior to your survey, because the surveyor is going to ask for something and you've got to be able to go right to it and explain it.
is it reasonable to think that the surveyor is going to spend an extraordinary amount of time reading whole EOP?
They probably won't read the whole EOP, but they are going to check and make sure that all the components are there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And if you look at the emergency management interview in the survey process guide for Joint Commission, it asks about, all those different plans and so forth, and the people responsible for that part of the EOP are going to need to be able to be conversant about it.
Yeah. What about because gosh, we're almost gonna run out of time here. It goes by really fast. So let's talk. So because we're already talking about accreditation, and Edwin mentioned drills. I think you mentioned drills too. So let's talk
Mhm.
a little bit about drills and what kind of documentation there ought to be. I mean, I know the hospital does a couple of drills a year, and the all sites do one. But I'll let you, the expert Sue, tell us that stuff. Uh-huh.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to make clear is, some hospitals are part of a bigger system that drills together. And one thing to be careful of is if that's your situation, you have to be able to write your own after action report for your hospital, not take the one not just take the one that might be a system-wide review. You have to have the after action report that's specific to your organization. So, um, you know, that's one thing that's very, very important. Um, your As Steve said, the offsite facilities have to have at least one drill annually. Sometimes that's a sticking point for people. You may have, a dozen or so offsite facilities, and to make sure each one of them gets at least one on-site exercise at their location every year is also important. Document organization, you have to be able to find what the surveyor is asking for. And yeah, so the drills have to be specific. You have to be able to speak to your lessons learned and what you're going to do as a result. That's why the after action report is so important. You have to say, here's what didn't go well, and here's what we're going to do about it. And who's in charge of implementing that, by when, and all of that information comes back to the committee. That's one gap that I see frequently when I'm in hospitals is the after action report, says here's what went wrong and here's what we're going to do about it, but there's no accountability, no feedback loop, nothing like that in the documentation to show that what was actually done. And and again, set the target dates. If Jane is responsible for doing this in a month, we need to make sure that Jane gets it done in a month,
Yeah.
and that all comes back to the committee.
So in follow up, then drill. I mean, so you have a drill, you have some opportunities to improve. You create those improvements. You do the training. Your follow up drill should test those improvements. Correct?
Absolutely,
Just like
absolutely.
same thing with fire drills, but fire drills are
Mhm,
loosely tied to emergency management. I mean, they're not
mhm.
from accreditation standards perspective, they're not. But a fire is an emergency.
Yes, it
Like
is.
everything else, right? So the process should be very similar. Kind of bringing this thing to a little bit of a closure. Edwin, do you have any other thoughts you want to add at this
No,
point?
I think we've covered most everything. Again, the whole issue is this is a total team sport. This is not cannot be a fractured approach. It must be planned. You must have the drills. You must have the assessment for your environment, your facility, your region. And Sue has done a very good job of detailing that.
Yeah, and I just want to stress one other point, and we've alluded to this before, but there are going to be some documentation requests that aren't located within the EM committee, but may be located within human resources. The records of staff training, the credentials of the leader for emergency management, and so on and so forth. So, I would also suggest that you do practice sessions for both the document review and the interview session, just so you have a chance to be exposed to the questions all of the committee members do, and they can kind of maybe even determine, well, if this gets asked, who's going to be responsible for answering it, so you can do some preparation. And
Yeah.
again, um, those questions are available for Joint Commission in the survey process guide.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sue. And shameless plug here, but we can actually now we have the technology. We could support and help them do that kind of mock
Yeah.
review remotely. So
Mhm.
set up a time with leadership, jump on the Ready Now community live, and we'll walk them right through it and give them feedback immediately. So sorry, but hey, got to pay the bills. So anyway. I really appreciate both of y'all, your time. I'm going to try to wrap this up really quickly. Here's we're at the 30 minutes. So if you've had, if you're interested in getting CECs, you're part of our MSL Ready Now community. Connect jump on over there and get those. If we didn't get to your questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll do our best to email you. Again, I want to thank Edwin and Sue, and thank you all for attending today. We'd love to see you over in the MSL Radio Now community, and we'd love to see you in 2 weeks here for the next episode. I have no idea what it is, but Edwin will tell me, and we'll have it done by then. So thank you for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.